Welcome, dark heart of transformation. Welcome to the edge. Not the edge where fear stops you, but the edge where fear gets pushed over. This is not for the light-hearted, the timid, or the ones who still sleep comfortably in their illusions. This is not a speech. This is a reckoning. You didn't come here for comfort. You came here because something inside you has already burned away. And now, you're just standing in the smoke, looking for what remains. Let me be perfectly clear. The version of you that held back, that bent to their judgments, that played the game by the rules written by those who never wanted you to win, that version, it's gone. You didn't just change, you destroyed. And there's no going back. You see, most people don't realize what it means to truly act, to truly choose. Not when the stakes are low, not when the world is watching, but when your hands are shaking and everything you thought you were is being rewritten by the choices you just made. That moment, that irreversible moment, that's the fracture in time. That's the place where timelines split. That's the wound in history where your name starts being carved in silence, long before they ever say it out loud. The damage you just did, it wasn't noise, it was impact. And impact doesn't fade, it echoes. They thought you were still playing their game. They thought you were bluffing. They thought this was still about balance and fairness and consensus. But the moment you made your move, the ground underneath their beliefs shifted. Something permanent was written into the bones of this reality, something that can't be undone. You didn't just walk through their line, you erased it. And now, they're not coming back from it. They can't, because you didn't just win. You redefined the battlefield, and some people will never recover when the war changes before they even realize they're losing. Don't misunderstand me, this isn't about revenge. This isn't about proving something. This isn't about screaming louder than your past. This is about waking up. You did something irreversible, and that power, that raw, unfiltered power, terrifies them. Not because of what it did to them, but because of what it revealed about you. You never needed their permission. You never needed their acceptance. You never needed their time, their praise, their understanding. All of that was noise, distraction, and you burned it down with one choice, one act, one undeniable, shattering truth. There are no applause breaks here, no handouts, no hand-holding. This is where silence grows teeth. This is where the world goes quiet, not out of respect, but because it's recalculating what you're capable of. When the dust settles, they'll say they didn't see it coming. Of course they didn't, because you were never broadcasting your intentions. You were building in silence. You were bleeding in silence. You were breaking and becoming in silence. And now, that silence has become your roar. Now, that silence has become their nightmare. Because the damage is done, permanent, etched into every future they thought they'd walk freely through. You didn't just cut them off. You closed the gates behind you. They told you healing takes time, but what they never told you is that sometimes healing looks like obliteration. Sometimes it looks like walking away from everything that once defined you, everything that tried to tame you, everything that kept you small and manageable. The moment you chose not to explain yourself anymore, not to shrink, not to ask for space, but to take it, that's when the damage happened. And you weren't trying to destroy them, but they built themselves on a version of you that no longer exists. And when that version died, so did their control. They say no one's recovering from what you just did, and they're right. Not because you wounded them, but because you woke them, because you forced them to confront the terrifying truth that people can evolve without permission, that a human being can burn down their entire identity and rise from the ashes, unrecognizable to those who thought they knew you. You didn't hurt them by changing. You hurt them by succeeding. You hurt them by showing that their limits were never yours, that their ceiling was never your sky. You broke something, not in them, but in the structure that held them above you. And once it's broken, it stays broken. They don't get to recover from this because they were feeding off your doubt. They were breathing in your hesitation. You were the light bulb in their room. And when you shut off, they were left in the dark. Some of them still think they can fix it, that if they just apologize, manipulate, reframe, you'll come back. But they don't understand. You're not coming back because the you they're calling to doesn't exist anymore. You didn't evolve. You erased. You rewrote the code. This isn't a chapter. It's a whole different book. And they're not in it. You have to understand. Some people will never accept that you've changed because your evolution makes their stagnation feel like death. You did what they were too afraid to do. You sacrificed comfort for power. You chose silence over chaos. You chose rebuilding over recycling. And when you made that choice, when you acted on it, you set off a chain reaction that can't be undone. This is permanent. There is no going back. Not for them, not for you. And that's exactly why you'll win. Let them talk. Let them tell the story their way. Let them call it betrayal, ego, selfishness. Let them mourn a version of you that never really served you. Let them cry for a ghost, because while they cling to memory, you're building destiny. While they argue with the past, you're creating futures they'll never touch. You became the rupture. You became the pivot point. And you didn't do it by accident. You chose it. You stood at the crossroads where most people turn around, and you set fire to the road behind you. You see, real transformation isn't beautiful. It isn't poetic. It's violent. It's brutal. It's surgical. It strips away everything false. And once you've gone through that, once you've watched everything familiar die, you don't walk the same. You don't speak the same. You don't breathe the same. And when you move through the world like that, they notice. Because it shakes something inside them. It challenges their story. It unravels their comfort. And whether they admit it or not, they know the damage is real. They feel it in the silence, in the absence, in the gap where you used to fit. Don't apologize for this. Don't grieve for what was never meant to last. Don't doubt the fire inside you just because it burns too brightly for those still living in shadows. This is your becoming. This is your power. And yes, it is permanent. Because the only way to rise is to leave something behind. And you left the version of you that needed permission. You left the one that bent and broke to keep peace that was never real. You left the one that stayed silent just to be loved. That's the damage they can't recover from. That's what they're mourning. Not what you did to them, but what you took from them. Control. They don't get to come back. Not because you hate them, not because you're heartless, but because the person they had access to is gone, and the new you doesn't live in their world anymore. You upgraded, you evolved, you ascended, and they're not invited to this level. This isn't revenge. This isn't cruelty. This is clarity. And once you see clearly, once the fog lifts, you stop reaching back to places that drained you. You stop explaining your worth. You stop negotiating your existence. The damage is real. The shift is irreversible. And the path forward, it's yours alone now. That's the cost of awakening. That's the price of power. But what you gain in return is everything. So when they say, no one's recovering from what you just did, smile. Not out of arrogance, but out of peace, because you finally understand. They were never meant to. You were never here to be understood. You were here to transform. And you did, permanently. And now that you've crossed that invisible threshold, now that you've chosen evolution over comfort, there's something you need to know. Something no one told you before, because they were too afraid to say it out loud. Once you become the one who no longer depends on approval, once you become the one who can walk away from anything without trembling, once you can stand in your solitude and not feel empty but invincible, you carry something ancient, something primal, something sacred that most people have forgotten how to hold. It's not about being cold. It's not about being heartless. It's about becoming whole again. This new version of you is dangerous, not because it seeks harm, but because it refuses harm. It refuses guilt. It refuses to be broken down for other people's comfort. It no longer participates in the lie that sacrifice equals virtue, because sometimes sacrifice is just silence in chains, and you shattered those chains without asking for permission, without writing a farewell note. And that is the kind of act that makes people fear you. They'll never say it directly, but behind their anger, behind their confusion and judgment, is one single truth. They're not upset that you changed. They're devastated that you survived without them. You didn't just leave them behind. You outgrew the container they built for you. And that is the damage that no one can repair, because you exposed the gap between what they expected you to be and what you truly are. And now, every time they think of you, they'll remember that they were wrong. They'll remember that you broke the pattern. They couldn't break that you walked away when they only ever threatened to. And that you meant it. And when someone means it, when they don't just say they've changed, but act on it with a silence so deep, it screams. That is the most powerful message anyone can send. Let them rewrite the past. Let them distort the story. Let them turn your clarity into cruelty. Because none of it matters now. Because the damage is already done. Because the wave has already hit, and the foundation of who they thought you were has already collapsed under the weight of who you've become. There's no rebuilding what wasn't real. There's no mending what you never agreed to carry in the first place. And if they're suffering now, it's not because of what you did. It's because they bet on your hesitation, and you gave them certainty they weren't prepared for. They never saw it coming because they thought pain would keep you still. They thought history would keep you obedient. They thought guilt would make you return, but you rose like smoke through the cracks. They couldn't seal you, found strength in places they never looked. You kept quiet for so long, they forgot that silence doesn't mean surrender. It means preparation. And when the day came, you moved with precision, with finality, with force. And that's what makes this permanent. Not rage, not revenge, not reaction, but the calm, the clarity, the silence of a decision made long ago, finally executed without apology. Some of them will wait, hoping you'll return as a version of yourself they once controlled. They'll romanticize the version of you that needed them. They'll light candles for a ghost that never really served you. But what they don't understand is this isn't a phase. This isn't temporary. This is transformation. And transformation doesn't have a reverse button. You can't unburn what has turned to ash. You can't rebuild a cage that's already been melted down into a sword. The look in your eyes now, it terrifies them. Not because it's cruel, but because it's honest. There's no more pretending. No more playing small. No more bending backwards for people who wouldn't even meet you halfway. You no longer barter your energy. You no longer perform your worth. You no longer dilute your truth to avoid confrontation. And that presence, that power, that finality, it marks people. Even if you never speak to them again, it etches itself into their memory, not through words, but through what you no longer give. You are the reminder they'll carry for the rest of their lives. The living evidence that people can change without warning, without negotiation, and without permission. You are the crack in their worldview. You are the silence that replaced noise, the distance that replaced desperation, and the peace that replaced pain. You are living proof that the most powerful revenge is simply never needing revenge, just rising, disappearing, thriving. Let them wonder where you went. Let them try to trace your steps. Let them build maps from fragments and memories, because they won't find you, not in the places they left you, not in the roles they boxed you into, not in the shadows where you used to shrink. For their comfort, you have transcended. You have dismantled every version of yourself that kept you accessible to the ones who never deserved the access in the first place. This is your silence, this is your space, this is your distance, and it's sacred now. It's earned, and there's no door back to who you were, no bridge to walk across and meet them halfway. Because the damage is permanent, the fire has done its job, and what rises from it isn't a rebuild. It's a rebirth with no resemblance to what came before. Somewhere out there, they're still telling the story, their way, still painting you as the villain, because that's easier than facing the truth, that they had access to you and wasted it, that they had your loyalty and betrayed it, that they had your presence and took it for granted, and that now the door is closed, not because you're cruel, but because you're finally aware. And there's no going back from awareness once your eyes open to what was once tolerated, once your soul rejects what once felt like home. There's no forgetting, there's no pretending, and there's no forgiving, just for the sake of peace. You didn't come this far to become digestible again. You didn't rise from ruin just to return to it. And they know it. Even if they never say it, they know that they can't reach you anymore. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not mentally, because you've become untouchable. Let them feel the absence. Let them hear the silence. Let them sit in the echo of your departure, because that's the real weight of this transformation. It's not in what you say. It's in what you never say again. It's not in your presence. It's in your absence. The quiet clarity that says you had your chance. And now the door is not just locked, it's gone. So when the voices come, the ones that whisper, you were too harsh, too fast, too final, remember this. They're not coming back from this because they were never meant to. You didn't destroy them. You freed yourself. And anyone who calls your freedom a weapon was always afraid of what you might do. When you finally realized you were never the cage, you were always the key. This is what they don't tell you about real change, that it costs more than comfort, that it breaks things permanently, that some people will never recover from the truth. You chose to stand in, and that's okay. That's how you know it's real, because truth always divides before it unites. And healing often looks like loss. Let them call it damage. Let them call it betrayal. Let them call it whatever helps them sleep at night, because you're not here to fix their perception. You're here to build a life that no longer needs their permission. You're not here to be remembered fondly. You're here to live freely. And if your freedom looks like destruction to them, then let it burn, because this is not just change. This is liberation. And liberation is never clean, never soft, never reversible. What you did wasn't cruel. It was necessary. What you did wasn't selfish. It was sacred. And what you did wasn't just a moment. It was a mark. The kind that doesn't fade, the kind that doesn't heal, the kind that shifts the course of everything that comes after. So walk forward. Not with regret, but with resolve, because this isn't the end. It's the origin, and they're not coming back from it because they were never meant to. You just did what they feared most. You became unreachable, and no one's recovering from that. Not even you. because you don't need to. You've already become something more. So here you are standing in the aftermath, not as a survivor, not as a victim, not even as a warrior anymore, but as something beyond all of that. You're the stillness after the storm, the silence that follows the thunder, the presence that cannot be dismissed, not because it demands attention, but because it removes the need for it altogether. You've gone so far past their expectations that they're left with nothing to compare you to anymore, and that's what breaks them more than anything. Not the words you said, not the moves you made, but the absence of explanation. Because when someone is truly finished, they stop explaining. There's a power that lives in endings, in real endings. Not the dramatic kind, not the ones where people hope for reconnection, but the endings that leave nothing behind but the echo of who you used to be. The endings that don't need closure, because the chapter wasn't closed, it was erased. Those are the ones that create legends. Those are the ones that mark a turning point in history, even if only in your own. You've reached a point now where you no longer even feel the need to be understood. You no longer care if they ever realize what they lost, what they misjudged, what they underestimated, because you've realized something greater, something most never will. That freedom doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from being unavailable to the versions of life that drain you. Freedom is not a feeling, it's a decision, and you've made it. And once it's made, once it's lived, there is no return. This is what permanent change looks like. It doesn't knock, it leaves. It doesn't shout. It vanishes. It doesn't ask. It acts, and you've acted in a way that they never saw coming. Not because you were hiding, but because they were blind to your growth. They weren't paying attention to the way your silence sharpened, the way your absence clarified, the way your energy turned inward and grew roots so deep they cracked the foundation of who you were. They'll replay the last conversation. They'll rewind every moment. They'll search for the clue they missed, but there won't be one. Not because you were deceptive, but because you were done. And when someone is done, they don't explain. They exit and leave the lesson behind. The kind of lesson that hurts because it was never spoken aloud. The kind that haunts because it leaves no door open. Just the memory of what once was, and the unbearable truth that it will never be again. There's a beauty in this moment, a quiet, unshakable beauty in knowing you don't owe anyone your softness anymore. You don't owe anyone your availability, your re-explanation, your repeated self-sacrifice, because this new chapter isn't built on proving your worth. It's built on owning it without discussion, without compromise, without apology. And that ownership is what they'll never recover from. You became the end of an era, the final breath in a long line of conversations that never truly saw you. You became the full stop in a sentence they thought they could rewrite. But this isn't fiction. This is your life, and you've reclaimed the pen. No one else gets to write your story now. No one else gets to add themselves to the chapters ahead. Not unless they earn a place. Not unless they bring peace, not chaos. Not unless they add to your silence rather than disrupt it. So if it still hurts, let it hurt. If your hands still shake from the weight of what you had to release, let them shake. That's not weakness. That's aftershock. Because change that matters doesn't come easy. It rips it, unroots, it breaks. And what you're feeling now isn't regret. It's residue. The fading fingerprints of who you used to be, dissolving into the reality of who you are.